All right. Thanks everyone for bearing with us. Our apologies for the technical difficulties as we kind of progress through these things. It's bound to happen, but we really appreciate your patience and we'll be going a little bit over today just in case you have any additional questions. We're happy to address them. So again, please put your questions in the feed. And I think that I got caught off right as I was talking about 6 and 8-year-olds who are needing a little bit of help and guidance around staying socially distanced, wearing their masks, and it sounds like they're missing roughhousing with their friends and peers. So I wanted to go ahead and kind of address those concerns. So I know that, again, these are things that a lot of parents and caregivers are struggling with. I want to make sure that we're thinking about kind of the age and the developmental appropriateness of some of these aspects, right? So we know that 6 and 8-year-olds are, again, likely to be relatively impulsive, and they may need additional explanation from their parents and caregivers about the importance of wearing masks and why that's just so important. I think it's important to explain these things to kids in a way that is developmentally friendly and appropriate without, like you said, trying to scare them, but sharing with them the importance of these topics and how relevant it is, not just now, but as we continue to progress and transition and as these restrictions ease. I think you want to make sure that your 6 and 8-year-old do get a hefty dose of roughhousing with them, with each other, maybe with other caregivers in a situation when it is safe and appropriate. And so you want to make sure that their roughhousing bucket is being filled up day by day, if you will, so that when they do have an opportunity to get with friends or peers or others, that they are able to kind of restrict or to able to stand back a little bit and follow your directions when they're with others. I think it's also important for really young kids for us to think a couple steps ahead and do our best to anticipate these interactions and give them something to do instead of roughhousing, right? So it might make sense to think about games or activities that have a little social distancing just kind of built right in, or provide the kids an opportunity to still do fun things in maybe a group format that doesn't really require touching or that kind of stuff. So thinking creatively about games or crafts that can be done safely at a distance, and kids can continue to show each other in fun ways without, again, being too close. I think there also might be an opportunity to build up some familiarity and consistency with wearing a mask by wearing a mask in other situations for short durations, right? So before you're expecting your child to keep the mask on for a long period of time in a social interaction, maybe planning some short outings where they have to wear their mask and you give them rewards and praise for following those directions and keeping their mask on safely as they need to. So I think thinking ahead about those things, programming them in. I would also say that the first few social interactions that you have should be short in duration if at all possible, so that your child does feel some success after a quick amount of time of that interaction and does have an opportunity, a good opportunity to follow those directions in that moment, stay safe and healthy. So really great question, and one that I think, again, a lot of parents and caregivers will be struggling with across the next little bit of time. Okay. Sure. Travis, I can't see you. I can hear you. Hi, my name is Dr. Stephanie Lee, and I'm a clinical psychologist at the Child Mind at Child Mind Institute. Okay, great. So again, we appreciate you bearing with us during these technological difficulties, all of which I'm sure you've experienced as we progress through these telehealth and working from home kind of models. So thanks so much for your patience. We have some other questions that were from families previously when we sent out inquiries about kind of thinking ahead and managing behavior as these restrictions ease, right? So one here we have from a parent of a 14-year-old who says, my 14-year-old does not care about the rules or restrictions. He thinks the virus is overblown and nothing we say seems to get through. He wants to start seeing his friends again and just gets angry when we try to talk to him about safety, his and ours. I'm so tired of fighting. What do we do? It's a really great question, and one that's a real struggle. I think that a lot of 14-year-olds are missing their friends and missing those peer interactions, and they're very eager to have those things come back. At the same time, you as parents, again, need to kind of balance the safety and the health of you and your family overall. As I said kind of in the beginning of the Facebook Live today, I think it's imperative for parents and caregivers to be on the same page so that there's no accidental or inadvertent misconstruing of information or any inconsistencies in terms of caregivers' rules and regulations about what's safe and what's healthy. I think once those rules are established, then it is important to talk with your 14-year-old about these are the rules and these are why. It's unlikely that your 14-year-old is likely to say immediately in that moment, oh, thanks, this is great information I hadn't considered, right? But it might be worth thinking about finding additional resources online at childline.org or across kind of some different searches that you might do that shares this information with your 14-year-old in a palatable way, developmentally appropriate way, possibly even looking at if there's any stars or anyone that your child relates to who's sharing this type of information in relation to safety, so that maybe you can reiterate your messages with others and that type of thing. If you're comfortable talking with other parents and other caregivers, I think it's also important to kind of see what your child's friends and peers, what their rules and regulations might be, not because you're going to need to change yours, but so that you know what you're dealing with and what you might be competing with, quote unquote, in terms of what your 14-year-old's expectations might be in terms of social outings moving forward. I think it's also important to make sure that if your child does follow these rules, if they are willing to engage you in any discussions related to safety and things, make a big deal out of that, praise that. You may end up needing to put rewards and consequences. You may need to associate rewards and consequences with your 14-year-old's ability to follow these directions and follow the rules and regulations that you might set in the household. Again, it's important to be transparent and be clear with your kids about why you're setting the rules that you are, even if they're not going to accept them. So really, this is not so different than a curfew you might set for your child where they think they should be able to stay out till 12:30 and you think they should only be able to stay out till midnight. And while they might not like it, and there might be other parents who are letting their kids stay out till 12:30, if it's your household rule that kids have to be back at midnight, that's your rule. And then that's what needs to be followed in terms of, again, rewards and consequences. Making sure, too, that kind of given the unusual context and the fact that your child is so motivated to hang out with peers, maybe sweetening the pot and making sure that there are high potency and reinforcing rewards in place for your child when they are able to follow these rules and regulations, possibly even rewards that might be associated with future outings with their peers or opportunities to do more fun things with their peers, since it sounds like that's what's most motivating to this teenager at this current time. I have another question here. Any advice on shifting therapy practice to teletherapy with children, specifically continuing to provide therapeutic boundaries? It's a really, really great question, and one I think that we've been talking about, not just with families, but across our colleagues at Child Mind Institute as well. I think that using telehealth is an incredibly useful format, and we're really excited to be able to provide families with services kind of in their own environment and in their home. As you can imagine, of course, these things do create some challenges in terms of boundary setting, not just for you, but for the patients as well. And so I think it's important to have clear and open, transparent conversations with your families and patients about these types of things ahead of time. I think there are ways to set boundaries in terms of maybe blocking your background or making sure that your background is consistent every time so that people aren't asking those types of questions. Thinking a couple steps ahead about questions that a child or a parent might ask that might feel intrusive to you as the therapist, but that you can kind of manage in a slightly more sensitive way if you've thought more about it. I also think that, making sure that you're very clear with parents and families about when you're available, when you're not available, and then being clear with you about when they're going to need that help. What we have found at Child Mind is that a lot of families are benefiting exponentially from the telehealth opportunities, mostly because we are able to kind of meet kids and families where they're at. We've worked with a number of kids where they might have been a little bit more anxious to go into the clinic, and they feel less anxiety sitting on their bed in their own pajamas having their therapy session. While this can, again, create some issues related to boundaries, it can also increase the rapport building exponentially or in a very quick way. So I think it's important to, again, be very open, honest, transparent throughout the process. And if at any time parents or families are asking you questions that don't feel comfortable, or you end up feeling like a child is sharing things that are not necessarily relevant or important to you in terms of the therapeutic relationship, letting them know, stopping in that moment and saying, this is a unique forum. We do need to talk through some of these types of things. So really great question, and something I think that we all as mental health professionals are thinking more and more about as these things progress and transition. I think we have just one more question here, again, about kind of teenagers feeling some anxiety as these restrictions kind of ease. So this one says, I worry that my teenager will be more worried about seeing her friends than staying safe. How can I make sure she's taking precautions seriously? Again, so kind of a similar theme. I think that we want to make sure that we are talking openly and honestly, transparently with our teenager about why the rules and regulations are set up in the way that they are, making sure that you and other caregivers are on the same page about those things, and then following up with your teenager consistently to make sure that they're following the rules, but that you're also rewarding them for following those regulations and validating the experience of how hard it is. Many of us are going to have difficulty adjusting to the new normal, if you will, mask wearing, distancing, and we're bound to make some mistakes. It's important to be kind to ourselves and kind to others when these mistakes occur, and to think a little bit about the best ways to problem solve or to remedy those errors moving forward. I might even talk with your teenager ahead of time about some things that might come up in maybe a peer pressure way, or kind of what if your friends do ask you to take your mask off? What if your friends do ask you to go to inside Starbucks when we've all agreed that that's not what our family rules are right now? And helping them to maybe develop some scripts or ways for them to sensitively address those things, because it's likely that there may be differences amongst peers and teenagers around comfort level and what's being allowed. So thinking through those things, trying to stay as many steps ahead of your child or teenager as you possibly can, because that's going to prepare you to prepare them for the next steps. I also just feel it's pretty important to provide a very quick word on modeling. A lot of parents and caregivers are going to be in a position themselves where social distancing and masks, as I said, are going to be new and unique. It's important for parents to be a little bit more meta about these experiences, talking candidly with their kids and adolescents about how difficult it is for them to remember, how difficult it is for them to keep their masks on. I think the more that we can validate these experiences and talk out loud about how we're problem solving those things, how we're reminding ourselves, oh, when I went into the office the other day and I had my mask off, well, when I was in my personal office, I had to remember when I got into the hallway. And so now I put a Post-it note up on my door that reminds me, mask on before I leave my office. Might be something that you guys want to do as a Post-it note on the house before we leave, so that we remember to take our masks on our nightly walk, right? So again, thinking about our own experiences, ways we've problem solved, and sharing those things with our kids openly and honestly. If you're modeling inappropriate behavior, chances are your children and adolescents are going to hear what you say, but maybe not take it in with the same intensity. So if you're saying to wear your mask in public, but then you're not doing those things and your child knows it, it's going to be important for you to at least explain why that might be the case, or do maybe a slightly better job of modeling or practicing what you preach. Because again, what we know is kids and adolescents pay a lot of attention to what we say, but they pay a lot more attention to what we do. Really, really good question. So it doesn't look like we have too many more questions coming in the feed here. So So I think we can go ahead and probably round out. Um, I want to thank you all again for joining me today and hanging out with me, even through the technological difficulties. I certainly hope it was helpful, and I want you to remember that we're here every day and we look through your questions daily. I also want to point viewers to the Facebook Live that we provided on Monday at 1 o'clock that was recorded, that was related to talking to kids about race and diversity and kind of the current affairs. So if you have more questions or concerns about those topics, please, please, please visit our Facebook Live page so that you can follow up with those additional resources. The Child Mind Institute is here to help with the mental health and parenting needs of this coronavirus crisis and all the crises that we're currently experiencing, no matter where you are. Please visit childmind.org/telehealth to learn more about the incredible variety of remote telehealth resources we have available during this time for children, our teens, and our young adults. Please be safe, and thank you so much for joining us.